If we're back on the air. But
welcome back to the third edition of Island Tea.
And take a sip.
And we're going to welcome to the studio our guest for this this segment, which is called, what is it called, Jade? Brain food?
Because she likes to tell us, like we don't know.
Every time we go on break, folks, she instructs us on exactly what to say, like we don't know what we're doing.
Like we does know these things, and she just have to say it. And I
so
feel like if she don't say it, she can't sleep tonight. So we just let her say it.
So welcome to the studio, the esteemed Dentrecia Blanchette. Welcome to Island Tea. How are you?
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here. I feel like I should have a coffee mug here with some type of tea, some lemongrass, something.
Jade should have told you about that.
Jade should have told you, but Jade was busy telling us what the segment name.
So folks listening, in case you haven't noticed, every time something goes wrong, we
blame it on Jade.
Blame it on Jade. When in doubt, blame Jade.
But if you're a future guest or any returning guest, feel free to bring tea, coffee, whatever you want, because that's how we do it.
That's what the show is about.
Nice.
So what are you here to talk to us about today, Madam Blanchette?
Sure. So we're going to be speaking about mental health, how we can cope during this unprecedented time for a lot of us, and what we can do really practically to just move through this time.
Okay. So can you tell us a bit about your background, your studies, etc.? You mentioned that you returned to St. Kitts about 2 years ago, yes? And what were you doing while you were abroad? I hope you're being productive.
I was being productive. It was a surprise to return home. I didn't, sometimes when you leave St. Kitts, the intention is not to return home, especially because of the lack of opportunities.
We spoke about that yesterday.
Yep.
Right. So I was, working and studying, did some studies, my grad studies in clinical psychology, and really felt like I needed to come back home to really shift the mental health landscape here, because I felt I was in Barbados. So I felt like therapy, mental health, it was a privilege. And I said, many Kittitians don't have that privilege. And it would be remiss of me to stay out there, even if I, and not help my own. Amen. So I returned home. Life would have it that everything would align. And I've started a nonprofit organization, Sugar for Your Heart, where we do group therapy for females and for males.
What's it called? Sugar for Your Heart?
Sugar for Your Heart.
That's lovely.
So the sessions that we have for females are Be Well and Bloom. And we, pre-COVID-19, we met monthly and we discussed mental health issues. And then we started, just after November, My Elephant Tales for men. And when we think about elephants in the room, it's a lot of issues that we don't want to talk about, especially as men, especially as it relates to mental health. And in our small communities, we know that, men don't usually go to therapy. Hold up.
Elephant Tales?
Stop it.
Yep.
As in Tales?
No, Amali.
No, stories. Tales.
Tales.
I spelled it right.
Yeah,
Okay,
I thought you were spelling
the one with, the
ILS.
I forgive you, it's Jade's fault.
We blame it on Jade.
Carry on.
So we had those sessions for men, and interestingly, men showed up. Young men showed up. They opened up, and it was facilitated by a male therapist here on island, because I felt like a male therapist can better connect with males. But I was there in the room, and I felt really proud of the work that we're doing. We continue our work virtually for obvious reasons,
right.
But it's something that I'm so proud of, because when you think about St. Kitts and mental health, we think a stigma surrounds it. So when you have young persons coming into a space and really, unpacking and being vulnerable and opening up with clinicians here on island and myself, it's something that, we should not take lightly at all.
I concur. Of course you can't get into details on specific stories of specific individuals, but what are some of the things that you find that men locally have in terms of mental health?
So I feel like a lot of men suffer with anxiety. High functioning anxiety folk, even without them being diagnosed, they have really low grade anxiety, and that's scary. And then I've been seeing a lot of depression, and a lot of them didn't even know that they were depressed until they came into session, because they thought it was normal to feel how they were feeling since they're small.
Right, because it's been a long time.
It's been a long time, so they didn't have the language to even articulate how they feel, because they grew up in a certain environment where it was.
I'm glad you brought that up.
where it was the norm to feel a certain way.
Right.
And until someone said, hey, you have symptoms of XYZ, then they can say, oh, that is what I've been, dealing with. This is what I have to do to kind of, better myself. But I find anxiety and depression are huge ones. And sometimes it's masked by anger. Sometimes it's masked by there's a blockage where it's like you're speaking to a wall, so there's no emotional response. But it's really because of years of just being disappointed and you're depressed and no one is listening to you. You don't have an outlet where you just lock off yourself.
It becomes
Then
normal.
I feel like you're attacking me personally.
So, Amali, I think maybe you might need to join Elephant.
I'm telling you, I have lots of tales. Lots of tales,
Yeah.
but you touched on a very good point, and I often discuss this with my intellectual peers, in terms of the difference in how we raise our boys from our girls, right? Our girls are to express themselves and talk, and it's okay to show emotions. When a girl is going through something rough, mama take it's okay, baby, just cry, let's cry together, and they are raised with a lot more emotional support. Whereas boys,
Right.
they fall on and they're crying. Stop crying, big boys don't cry. What are you doing?
What are you crying for?
Right.
Right, when a grown man, shows his friends a little bit of emotion and say, what? Like it is unnatural to show weakness. It is unnatural to show vulnerability.
Right.
Right? And like you said, a lot of it is masked anger and disappointment.
Yep.
And several years, sometimes decades, of having to push down
Right.
your emotions as opposed to letting them out. And I think that's a really, really good point you brought up.
Suppressing emotions has become normal for a lot of us, especially even if we remove the fact, even if we remove gender.
Yep.
Suppressing emotions as a West Indian
Oh yeah,
is a
definitely.
massive
And sweeping
issue.
issues under the rug.
We
And
kind of
being in
learn.
denial.
We
Yeah.
kind of learn not to talk about things. We learn to let things go. We learn to.
Ignore things.
People will call you heg for you
Yeah.
to. If you have to address how you feel about something, they say you're heg, you're fussy, you're miserable.
Right.
It's
Right.
they will attack your emotional
And
state with regular words.
Which makes it worse. And then for men as well, there's a different dynamic. I mean, traditionally, men has been seen as the one in a family
Right.
to protect the family, to be that rock for the family.
And I guess the rock
to be
also
strong
comes with
for
no
the family.
emotion.
So the rock can't be showing weakness. When the rest of the family is weak, the rock is expected to actually pick up the slack and say,
Yeah.
listen, we're going to get through this.
But that
I
is
can fix the problem.
that is a narrative that we want to get rid of, because you can't lead, you can't, be in quotation mark the head of whatever if you aren't self-aware, if you aren't emotionally intelligent, if you aren't in tune with yourself. And so that is why it's important for men to really consider, how am I doing, checking in with myself, and give yourself space to feel whatever you're feeling and validate that and do the work. And so I'm proud of the men. I've seen a lot of young men speaking out about their mental health, putting in the work, going to therapy,
Right.
supporting their friends on their own journeys. And I think that is revolutionary for a small island, for St. Kitts. And I'm excited about what the next generation will have at their disposal, because men and women are doing the necessary work, especially within our generation. And I see it with young mothers as well, especially young mothers who are a bit more educated and they've been exposed to a bit more. They allow their young men to express themselves.
Right. I've seen that.
They
yeah.
give their sons space to feel without the judgment that a lot of the older generation would have placed on, older or you guys.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's on my way, but
Yeah, so I think there's a shift, but it's one that we have to continually pour into in order if we want to see just some, a more positive direction.
Do you have guys? Well, I'm assuming you do. But to what extent do you have, young men, even older men, coming to these sessions and coming to you, or the male counselor that you mentioned, with issues of emotional abuse like in relationships and marriages and stuff?
Absolutely, and we see that a lot of young women aren't skilled at times in regulating their own emotions, and they take it out on their partners. And so a lot of men are emotionally abused. We know this. We know that Kittitian women can be aggressive.
Can be.
listen, it's a good thing she said it, because
And that's why I asked you the question because I wanted to say.
You wanted to
We
say
can
more.
be
So then,
aggressive.
now we can comment on it, Kevon. Okay.
No, I ain't
it's already
commenting.
been brought.
And you think I can get stoned when I leave the studio?
You see, the
So we
comment
can be
alone-
aggressive.
That comment alone just shows
Yeah.
how threatened he is.
I'm scared. I'm scared.
Some to speak to their boys over their feelings without even going into detail, and they'll rough them up. And
yeah.
that can be a
So
deterrent.
we just gotta say yes, babe, yes.
Okay.
And then go in the car and cry.
Lock yourself in the bathroom and cry.
I tell you, take a hot shower and curl up in the fetal position. But that's brilliant. That's brilliant. So you see, you've been doing these sessions virtually, and is that going well?
It's been going okay. I feel that persons are a bit fatigued by Zoom and meetings and lives and all the works.
It's honestly been a bit overwhelming because
It is.
we have come to a point where we used to use social media, but then we also had the option to go outside, and it's sort of like a jump between both. But then
Right.
now it's sort of like, even if I choose to use social media, what's on social media is like being outside. So it's like I
Right.
have to do two at once.
Yep.
So
It's very
a lot of people are just
overwhelming.
like, I can't deal.
So a lot of persons are very overwhelmed, and they're just like, you know what, is this something I don't have to do? I'm not going to do it. And so we've seen a dip in our numbers, which is fair because no one is expected to really thrive within this time. We're in a pandemic,
Oh, it's terrible.
especially within this political time here. Things are a bit heightened.
It's a perfect storm.
So, I mean, your emotions can be all over the place. You don't need an extra thing. But we do find that persons check in, and that's a good thing, that they are aware of whatever they're feeling. So I'm happy for that.
Okay, brilliant.
So,
I think, yeah, go ahead, Kevon, sorry.
You make me forget because you cut me off.
And I want to mention,
Jade.
since we spoke about fatigue, that it's okay for persons to literally log off from
Right.
social media, unplug, do what you have to do. I know sometimes we want to be in the know all the time. We want to see the threads and the comments and, be in the conversations. But if it's affecting your mind, if it's affecting your mood, man, sometimes you just have to give yourself an hour and just say, I'm going to put my phone on do not disturb.
These sessions you were talking about with, you've been moving into Zoom sessions. How have the individuals been able to manage in terms of, they've been able to leave and have a meeting, a little safe space. Not everybody has that safe space in the home
Right.
where they have to Zoom from.
Right.
How have you been assisting people with creating a little safe space? Because I mean, we also have to take into account, not everybody have their own bedroom.
Right.
Not every bedroom is
Coded houses, yeah.
right.
Yep.
Not every bedroom is far enough away from the other bedroom. So you don't want to be. Some people don't even feel comfortable telling their family they're having issues. So how is
Or
that
that they're
been?
seeking help.
Right.
Right.
So how have you been assisting individuals in managing that?
So persons have the option, because we're aware that, sometimes 5 people, 8 people live in a house, and you may want to go to therapy over the person who you're living with. You know what I
Right.
mean? So it's really important that we give them the option to either meet in a safe space or to have that Zoom connect. So they have the option.
Okay.
And it's really because we want to take into consideration the reality of people right now here on St. Kitts. Not everybody has, their own space. But most persons select Zoom. There are persons who have selected face-to-face still. And it's good because we have relaxed hours right now.
Right,
So
yeah,
it
yeah,
works.
Right.
But it's something we take into consideration. And what we also do, we connect persons with clinicians here on island as well, because you know that as a clinician, as a therapist, you can only deal with so many caseloads. It's just you dealing with whatever. So we do referrals as well. And based on the information that you would have shared with us, we connected with someone who's a specialist here on island. And that has been tremendous. And I want to put a plug for local therapists. Many times we think that it's only the foreigners can help us, but we have locals here who studied, they're well trained, they're confidential, and they are willing to help persons for free at times and to work with your budget, because we know that therapy can be expensive. $125 a session is a huge thing for persons. And so we have local therapists who are aware of the cultural nuances and who really work out with you. This is okay. This is the plan that we're going to move with in order to get you help, because money should never be an issue when you think about your mental health. You know what I mean? And And when we spoke about privilege when I was in Barbados, and that's a privilege to have the money to go to therapy.
Right.
So we want to remove that privilege altogether and give you that accessibility without fear of,
not being able to afford
not being
it.
able to afford it.
Two things. I actually had a friend that reached out to me to tell me that he wanted some help, talk to someone, and he actually reached out to, I don't know how many therapists he reached out to, but he came back to me and said, yo, I can't even afford that deal. I was quoted at $250 per hour.
Yep.
Right? So, meaning I'm bothered with that deal.
Yep.
So I can't imagine the number of people that are out there that want help, that are willing to actually speak to someone but
Right.
don't have the funds, especially in this current corona pandemic. That's one, with so many people that lost jobs and have others to support, etc., that they wouldn't usually have to support.
Right.
Secondly, I think it was yesterday or the day before yesterday, Kevon, we were discussing the difference between how men and women respond to negativity in relationships. And we mentioned that women are much more forgiving when it comes to their partners than men are. And this is based on conversations with several women and guys over the years.
Okay.
Right? So it's not any scientific data, just based on personal relationships with people.
Right.
What advice do you have to our women? Because I mentioned when we were discussing it that a woman would be in relations with a guy that obviously she loves,
Right.
and he would do things over and over and over and over again, and she would forgive him over and over and over and over again, whether it's abuse or cheating or emotional abuse or just neglect, right? And I think women have this thing in their minds, well, he gonna do better. I'm gonna eventually get through to him, and he gonna improve and thing, and I love him, so I'm gonna stay.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't find that men are so tolerant when it comes to women and their issues and that they have with them. So what advice do you have to, especially with young women who are actually in relationships that aren't conducive to their health,
Right.
whether it's mental or physical, but they are deeply in love and are invested in the particular young gentleman? What is your advice to them in terms of how to move forward, or if to move forward?
Yep. I think it's important for us to appreciate that. It's really important for us to appreciate that relationships are layered, and so a person stay in relationships for different reasons. And so it's not, I'm seeing these signs and I can automatically cut off everything. And so we want young persons to really consider, is it affecting my health? Is it affecting me as a person? And what are my options for me to move from this relationship that is hurting me? A lot of young persons can't do that because they don't identify that the relationship is hurting them.
Right.
They're so used to pain, they're so used to the toxicity of the relationship that they think it's normal. So until they realize this is hurting me and it's may hurt my children, if you have children, they're not going to make that next step. So it's really important for persons to begin to identify what is toxic, what is negative, and my options for moving on. Because we know some persons live with their partners. We know that children are involved. And so it's not just up and leave. And we know the cost of living in things is expensive, so it's not just up and leave. So you have to consider your options for moving forward, whether it is going to therapy, whether it is getting a second job, whether it is moving in with a friend, whatever it is. Think about those options. And so we're not here to tell persons what to do in your relationship, but consider, is my relationship toxic? And what are my options, my realistic options to leave that toxic relationship? And you can have emotions tied to a toxic person.
Right.
There's going to be emotional attachments.
Right.
So it's not like I realize these signs and I'm done with him.
Right.
It's really
You have to
beyond
disconnect.
my
You
feelings.
have to try to disconnect.
This is what I have to do for myself and for my children if children are involved.
Right. I always tell my female friends, put yourself first.
Yep.
Always. Actually, I tell everybody that. Your own mental health and your own physical health it should be of utmost priority.
Yep.
And if those two things aren't in good condition, then, the relationship will suffer even more.
Yep.
Dentrecia, we want to thank you very much
Very,
for joining
very
us
much.
this morning. It's good to see you. I haven't seen you in over 10
Thank
years.
you for having me.
We hope
Welcome-
you'll join
welcome
us
back
again
home.
at some point.
I know
We
this
would-
was so short.
Yeah, we need
Yeah,
to
we
we need
have
to
a
cut
packed
out. We need to
schedule today.
carve out a solid piece of time for this.
for
'cause-
health and mental health
Yeah.
because it's a
We'll
Because
try-
we do
we'll try
we do
next
have
week.
that we do have a segment where we try to discuss a little bit of mental health.
Okay.
So maybe we might need to kind of stretch that segment
Yeah.
and bring you into to make it
It's a lot to
good
unpack.
thing. It's a lot.
A lot to unpack. But
Yeah.
thank you very much for coming.
Thank you so much.
We're gonna take a quick break, and we're gonna get back with our second guest for this morning's edition of Island Tea.